Okay, folks, so go ahead and download this batch processing thing, this batch processing file. So that's what we're doing today, is kind of looking at this idea of batch processing. The idea behind batch processing is we're going to take some small process. We say we've got this little part that needs to be done. We'll figure out how to do that part, and then we realize, oh, we have to do that part 1,000 times. And so we're going to have some code that runs across a whole set of things that we have to deal with, and then for each element in that set, we're going to process that in a particular way. So that's the idea behind batch processing. Some process that happens on a small scale, but then we duplicate it over and over again to handle a larger, kind of a larger project. So, this is batch. I think I already have it open. No, that's like the thing we did yesterday. Oh, here it is, batch processing. Okay. So here's the idea on what we're trying to accomplish today. We've got a bunch of information that looks like it was outputted from some kind of ERP system. Hello, maximize. Some kind of ERP system. We've got some kind of quarterly numbers for Anne Hanna here. So we've got, she's in the Provo office, and these were her sales numbers for the different quarters. 9,000 in the first quarter, 13,000, 2,000 in the third quarter. Was a bad quarter for her, apparently. And then we've got this block. So this block of data pertains to Anne. And then Luca has this block of information, So this is really pretty normal to be able to say, we've got some system that's putting information out, and that information is not structured very well for what I need to do with it. And so today, the whole process is, how do we take this, and it goes down for like thousands of rows, over 1,000 rows. We've got to take this data, and we've got to bring it into this format. I think we've got it here, end up, to where we say we just want the employee's name, the office they're from, Provo, and then their total sales. We don't want quarterly numbers. We just want the total sales for the year, and we want the average quarterly number as well. That's what we're after. All right, could you imagine that someone might hire you as an intern and say, you know what, here, we just need you to convert this data and expect you to do it by hand? What do you think? Is that like outside of the realm of possibility in the 21st century? No, that is totally within the realm of possibility. In fact, that stuff we did yesterday where we were pulling data off of the internet, I was surprised to find out. I had a student come back to me after going on an internship. And he said, this is what I did my whole internship. Was they expected me, who was it? It was Amazon.com, of all people. I guess there are some camera manufacturers who say, you know, if you're going to sell this camera, you have to sell it at this price. There is no flexibility on what you offer this price. You're going to get a certain percentage of that, but you've got to sell it at this price. And they're basically saying, we don't want our distribution channel partners competing with each other on the price of the camera. And so that's the rule. You got to sell at this price. So how do these different distributors compete with each other? They compete based on the other free things they throw in with the camera when you buy it at that price. And so Amazon is totally set up to be able to check and see what price their competitors are selling things for. But this idea of saying, is the price, we know the price is going to be the same, we got to find out what stuff other people are offering for it so our offering can be competitive. So they hire an intern, and your job is just every get and see this camera so we can that we're Amazon is paying a person to do this stuff by hand. Does that strike anyone as crazy besides me? I mean, of all the companies who should be able to do this automatically, you think Amazon could do this? And in fact, you know, the department that's saying, hey, we need to look at this automatically, they talk to the IT department there at Amazon. You think it's the whole company because they're, you know, technology. A year, you know, for us to get to that, and it's going to cost, you know, all this kind of untold amounts of money to do it. It was less to pay an intern to do it. Well, they happened to get my intern. And my intern was, I'm not a program to do it. So here he is. He's on Excel to go collect information about competitors. He learned, you know, yesterday that's pretty important. I mean, it was pretty important for him anyway. But the idea that we might have, you know, pay a human to make these kinds of adjustments, that's really still pretty normal. Okay, so as we look at this, we've got to say, kind of the first step I would like to tackle with this is how are we going to get to all the sets? So rather than starting our code by saying, let's process the first block, let's start our code by saying, I want to be able to identify the sets. I want to be able to run through all of this data and just print off the first names. So talk to me about an algorithm. How would we do that? Any thoughts? So when you look at that data, go ahead. Okay, so here's what you're saying. Maybe what we can do is we can just say, hey, there's a block of 7 here. We just say the first line has the first name, second line has the last name, third line has the city, the next 4 lines have the quarterly numbers. Okay, yeah, so I think in terms of processing each block, that's a pretty good approach. For us to know if that's going to work, we're going to have to kind of look through it and see, does this always have 7 lines of data? That's kind of the first question. That'd be a good thing to kind of look through and see, is that right? Or every once in a while, does it throw in an 8th line? Where someone has, a supervisor where they don't normally have a supervisor or something like that. You realize, and it happens in this data, it's always 7 lines. And so that's the direction that we'll head once we start working with a block. But I first want to say, what's the algorithm to find each of the blocks? Don't talk to me in terms of VBA. So we'll start at row 1. Then what do we do? Go ahead. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Hey, if they always have 7 elements of data, then maybe what we do is we start at 1, and then we just, every time we've added rows, we've added 1 to the counter. We're going to the next row. What you're saying is, let's just add 8. And that'll take me to the next block. Add 8, and we'll keep adding 8 until we run into a blank line. That sounds pretty good. But let's take a look at row number 80 and see what happens. So here we've got 7 rows of data, blank row, 7 rows of data, blank row, 7 rows of data, blank row. Row number 80 looks good. What do we have here on 81? We got an extra blank line, so it's 8's going to work every time until we get here, and then it's 9. Oh, is that Professor Allen just trying to throw a wrench at you? No, it's not, actually. I'm not even sure where this data came from. But this idea is really pretty normal, where we say, we've got a block of data that's essentially the first page of data, and then there's something a little bit different, and then we have the next block of data, then something a little bit different, and the next block of data. So just adding 8 is so tempting. And in fact, when I sat down to write this problem the first time, I thought, oh yeah, easy, just add 8. And it ran, it's like 1,000 rows. It ran a little bit, well, it ran to the 80th row and then stopped because, I was looking for a blank line when I added 8, and I found it right here. And I went, hey, that's not very much data. What went wrong? So that approach is tempting, but wouldn't work unless we first went through and said, hey, anywhere there's 2 lines, delete. That's possible, but as a general rule, we prefer to say whatever source data we have, don't monkey with the data, just read it. And so we prefer not to come and say, let's delete some rows out of this. That would be okay, but we have to say, any other approach would have to be so hard to do that we're going to kind of take that little cheating approach. Other thoughts? Go ahead. Okay, so what you're saying is, look, maybe we don't even care what order these things come in. What you're saying is, look, if it says first, then we're going to deal with that as if it's a first name. And then if it says last, we'll deal with it as if it's a last name. That's also pretty tempting and would probably work pretty well, except if I try to treat this as individual, one piece of information, that's the fact that this set is all about an individual. And so I need to kind of say, here, I got to get to say, okay, I got to process this block because that block has to go into a line. And the direction that you're headed would probably go that way without too much trouble, but I really like something that you said, and you said, let's look at the label over here. And in fact, what if I just look for the word first? So if I just look for the word first, that's going to get me to the block. It's a first name. That's going to be at the first of each one of these blocks, regardless of how much space ends up being between the rows. So let's take that approach. Let's just say we're going to look through every single row, and then every time we see the word first, we'll say, aha, we're at the beginning of a new block, let's process it, and then we'll keep looking until we find the next first, and then we'll process that block. You ready to give it a shot? All right. So I'm going to open up my Visual Basic editor, Alt F11. Whoops. Alt F11 is the keystroke that brings it up straight away. And good heavens, what do I have open here? I have 2 projects, so I don't need 2 projects open. Batch process. Oh, here's FuncRes. FuncRes is like it's an add-in. It's not an XL. It's not an XLSX or XLSM. It's an XLAM. It's an add-in. You may or may not have it here, but that's actually what we're looking for. I don't want to see this. Let me close that one. And instead, I'm going to select on batch processing, and I'm going to insert a module. Is this the first time we've had to insert a module? I think it is. I think the stuff I've given you before, there's been a module there. In this one, there's no module, and so we've got to give ourselves a module. So insert module, and we're going to make sure that that module looks like it's a part of the batch processing workbook, and it is. Strange as it may seem, I could actually insert a module into this add-in, and that's not going to be good for anyone because I can't save it that way. So we want to make sure that that module becomes a part of the batch processing workbook. All right, we'll make a sub-procedure. Sub, why don't we just call this summarize sales? Okay, so now we've decided we're going to go through all of these rows, and when we find the name first, the word first in the first column, we'll know we've gotten to a block that we've got to process. But how can we tell when we're done with all the data? The only way we've done that so far in this class is we've just said, hey, let's just start executing until we hit a blank row. Is that going to work for us this time? No, why not? I got blank rows between the different groups of data. So I'm stuck again. How am I going to decide when to quit running through the data? Any thoughts? Yeah. What if your module doesn't say option explicit? Option explicit, for about half of you, it's going to say option. Raise your hand if it says option explicit for you. Oh, you can write it in if you want to. It might come in automatically. Let me tell you what option explicit does. Option explicit says it's an option, it's a compiler option. It's a directive to the compiler, the program that's going to actually look at what I wrote and actually make it do something. It's a directive telling it how to compile. What's that saying is that option explicit says, if I'm going to use a variable, I have to declare it first. In VBA, it turns out I could just make up a variable name and start using it. I don't even have to declare it. If I don't declare it, Visual Basic Interpreter looks at it and goes, oh, you got a new variable here, you haven't declared it. You must be new at this. You don't know you're supposed to declare your variables. That's okay, I'll declare it for you. And it makes a guess at what it thinks you want to do with that data and declares the variable accordingly. And so option explicit will just force you to declare your variables. And what it will mean is it will mean that if you misspell a variable name, it will tell you it's misspelled because it'll say you haven't declared the variable. And so having option explicit in there is really good because one of the hardest things to track in programming, one of the hardest errors, is a misspelled variable name. Because you look at the variable name, you think it's spelled right, and you just kind of move on. Option explicit at the top will force you to declare your variables. It's not a bad idea. In fact, let me show you how to make it happen automatically the next time you create a module. If you come to Tools, Options, inside your Visual Basic Editor, there's a checkbox right here that says Require Variable Declaration. And so that won't change existing modules, but when you create a new module, it'll just put option explicit. That's all it does. It puts option explicit at the top. You can literally type it in or delete it as you want to. The question is, will it come in by default?
By the way, docking might fix your immediate window.
There's a choice here that might do it.
The tab docking.
Oh, really? Docking. Dock the immediate window. Yeah, it's not happening. Yeah, the problem with that is that there's some problem with the mouse driver on this computer. Okay. While we're here, are any of you ever annoyed by the fact that when you have a partially formed line and you leave that line, a message box comes up that says you're making an error? If that annoys you, you can get rid of that just by unchecking the auto syntax check right here. If you uncheck that box, it'll still make the line go red if there's a syntax error, but it's not going to nag you. You have an error. Yes, thank you. I know. I'm only halfway done with the line. I'm going to copy something. Anyway, so I usually reverse these first two checkboxes here. Require variable declaration and turn off auto syntax check. Okay, where were we? Oh, we're trying to find out how can we figure out when we're done. When we get to the very end of the data, how are we going to know? There's a couple of approaches that we could take. One is, you know what? We could say, if we ever run into 10 blank rows, 10 blank rows in a row, 10 blank cells in a row, well, that row seems strange. I mean, it's actually on a row, but as we go from row to row, 12 times, blank cell each time, we go, you know what? We're at the end of the data. So one way would be to have some kind of way to count the sequential blank cells we found. We know that 1 or 2, 3 is going to be okay, but if we get to 10, we'll assume we're at the end of the data. That would work. There's another way that teaches us something new that I would like to show you today, and that is, why don't we just find out what's the very last data that's in this column? What's the last row that has data in column 1? Once we know that, we can iterate until we get to that. So let's start off just by finding out and asking the question, what's the last row? And so to do that, I'm going to create a variable called last row. Dim last row as an integer. Okay. I wonder if I could fake this into docking if I did it like this. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. It docked, but just not the way I wanted it to. Yeah, in the wrong place. Come on, dock. Never mind, okay. We're going to live with it just where it is. All right, so listen, folks. You're familiar with just like asking what a particular cell, what's at a particular cell. So let me just ask for cells, row number 95, column number 1, dot value. And so, that should be last, 95, column 1, should be Q3. See how well that worked? There we go, Q3. I mean, this is nothing new. Here's something that is new. You can ask how many rows there are on the worksheet. Watch this. Rows.count. That'll tell me. There's 1,048,576 rows on this worksheet. And you could go there pretty quickly, right? If I come here like column C and just hit control down arrow and then over there I am at the very end. It didn't take very long at all. I'm like 1,000,000 rows down. That didn't take long at all. Now, from here, how would I find the last data in this column? Control up would do it. That takes me right to the last data. Incidentally, let me show you this. There's another keystroke sequence that will do it. That's older than control. Before we ever thought about using control for that, we used to use a 2-stroke sequence to get there. We would press the end key and then the up arrow. Watch this, one finger at a time. I got the one finger going, end, now up arrow. It does exactly the same thing. Why did I tell you that? Because the name of the VBA method that does this comes from the olden days when we used to hit end up to move to the next block of contiguous data. So let's see how we do it. The point is that I can take rows.count and I can slide that in right where I said row number 95. And instead of asking for the value because it's blank, let me ask for the address. That tells me it's now referring to the very last cell in that column. We get what I've done so far. This is somewhat magical. Instead of putting a number here, I've put an expression that evaluates to something. Now, every cell has a method called end, which allows me to do the same thing I would get with control up arrow, down arrow, left or right. And so instead of saying I want to get to that address, I want to say dot end, and then in parentheses I will say XL up. This is the same as being weighted on that lower cell and hitting end up. Ooh. Do I ever actually select that last cell? No. this just refers to that last cell, and this one refers to whatever cell I would be on if I hit end up from that last cell. And so this is another reference to a cell. I should be able to ask for the address of this. And that tells me that is A1067. Here it is, A1067. You'll notice that when I do that, it doesn't select it. All it does is refer to that cell, and then I can ask for a property of it. So far, so good? We've changed some of the properties. I can ask for the formula, I could ask for the value, I could ask for the text that's displayed, I could ask for lots of things. One of the things I can ask for is the row. And this will now tell me, so this expression here will tell me the last cell in the first column that has data. Got it? Pretty slick. So now I can take this and just say, you know what? I'm going to write that into this variable. Last row equals that expression. And I'll put a note here, row of the last data. Row of the last data in column 1. Okay, how many of you are looking at that statement and going, oh my gosh, that is so complicated? Yeah, it kind of is. There's a lot happening on that one row. Do they need to do stuff like this for the exam? I don't think so.
They need to be able to add data on and still be able to find the last row.
Like this? Or could they go down until you hit a blank cell? Oh, you got to do something like this on the exam. This would be a good thing to know. There you go. Questions? Here's the thing to realize. What this is this gets me to a particular cell, right up to here. This gets me to a cell, and then it has a method called end. I tell it to come up or XL down or XL, to right. And then that gets me to a cell as well. And so it's a different cell, but this part identifies a particular cell, and so at this point I have access to all the methods and properties that a cell would have as well. Okay. So now I can set up a loop that will loop from, where does the data start here? I think it starts on row number 1. Yeah. It's going to start from row number 1 and continue to loop until we get all the way to that end. If you've watched the videos on My Educator, you'll know there's a loop that's specifically designed for this called the for loop. I'm not going to teach it to you. You don't need it. You can do everything you could want to do with a for loop, you can do with a do loop. So I'm going to focus all of our practice in class on the do loop so that you get really good at it, because the final exam, which is a week from today, you've got to kind of move through it to be able to get this stuff done. Speaking of the final exam, it's here in this room. What time is it? I've got it posted on Learning Suite for the time. I think it's like 1 to 4 or something. Yes? Question is, do you have to attend your section? And the answer is, you could come to either one. So I've posted both of the times there for you. It is 1 to 4 in this room. A student asked me in the other class. He said, Professor Allen, I've looked at the average score for this class. It's like almost 90% is the average. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, uh-oh, that's a lot higher than it's supposed to be. The dean wants me to curve this class down. Trouble is, this is the first time I've taught the class. So I think I'm going to get a little bit of latitude. And, hey, don't clap yet, I'm not done. Oh, it gets better. And then I thought, part of the reason that you're scoring so high is because you just must be more dedicated students than the other students that have taken this class. It's part of it. But I think the largest part of the reason is that I'm just a better teacher than those other chumps. So who really should be punished for me being a good teacher? It's clearly not you. It should be me. That seems kind of strange too. But I shouldn't deduct your grade because I taught you better at this stuff. And the third factor that went into this decision is, after all, I have tenure. What are they going to do? It's going to be an uncomfortable conversation that I would prefer to avoid. But what the heck? So I've decided not to curve down And I may take it in the shorts over this, but you're not going to. So now you can clap. I'm done. Go fill out your course evaluations. Okay, no. The extra percentage point's still going to be in effect. Yep, so. What's that? What they're saying is, hey, other classes have been high at this point too. You know, they're defending those other chumps that I just talked about. Other classes have been here before. Many have tried and many have died, but we'll see. So anyway, the point is, I'm not going to curve down, you know, regardless of how well things go from here to the end of the class. Now I forgot what I was talking about. Okay, we got the last row here. We're talking about the exam. Oh, so you probably should know this for the exam. And let's go ahead and move on. Oh, yeah. So let's go ahead and just set up the loop. We'll do it as a do loop. So basic syntax. Starts with do, ends with loop. Right here before the end, I'm going to put something that will save my bacon. What's it called? Do events. Now, let me have some variable that I'm going to use to control this. So let me dim r as an integer. I'll just use that to keep track of which row I'm on. I'm going to start r at 1 here, and then as part of the control of the loop, I will increment r. r equals what it used to be plus 1. Now I've got to give it some exit condition. How do I know when I'm done? Loop until r is greater than what? Last row. I've already figured out what's the last row that contains any data on the first column. And so I've set up my loop now to do what I want it to do. I could, you know, do a debug.print and run this thing. It should print off everything from that first column. Let me go ahead and do it. Debug.print cells, whoops, row number r, column number 1, dot value. And so, always a good idea to save before you run. So Control S and run. That should just run all of that data off. And there it is. It stopped, so that's good. Might be more interesting to look at column 2 instead of column 1. And it runs through, and I actually see then the different data for each of these people. Okay, so now I've figured out something that says we can now kind of go across this data and stop, you know, without going all the way to the end of my 1.04 million rows. Now when I get to a block of data, I'm ready to start processing it. And so I forgot who made the suggestion. Someone over here suggested, let's just loop until we find the word first. So let's get that set up. So right here, before I start incrementing, let's do this. Let's say if, and then we're looking at column 1, cells, whoops, row number r, column number 1, dot value is equal to first. Does case matter when I'm comparing strings? Yes, case is important. We got a couple of TAs down here, and I'm kind of surprised that we don't have any hands yet asking for help. So we got some TAs. Everyone else kind of with me on this, really? Another one up here. So if that equals first, get the hand up again, kind of about halfway up. If that equals first, then, you know, something's going to happen. And if. Do I need to have an else clause in here? No, I got to have the if and the end if, but the else I only need if I'm going to do something when the condition is false. In this case, I'm just concerned when the condition is true. So when I have found a cell that says this, we're ready to do that. So let's go ahead and move my print statement inside of that. And let me also include r. So I should see the row and then the name of that person's first name, the name of his first name, just that person's first name, showing up in the immediate window. So if I've done this right, I got a compiler error. Debug.print, oh, not r.cells, r comma cells. So r is the variable. I'm printing two things, variable and then that. So here's what I'm seeing. On line number 963, I've got Rasmus. On line number 972, I've got Oliver. You know, row number 980, I've got Amina, and so forth. So I'm feeling pretty good about it. I've got the control structure in place. I'm ready to start doing the summarization. And I would really like everyone to be with me at this point before we go on to the next step. So if you've got a question, if you're not here and you want to follow along, get your hand up and I'll see if I can come and help. We got a few. Let me go ahead and pause and we'll do that. So with a breakpoint set right here, let me go ahead and stop that again. With this breakpoint set, when I go to run this, it's going to pause right here, take me into break mode. I can hit F8 or just debug step into, that's F8. And that will execute those one line at a time. I just executed this row, last row, so I can print last row and see that value. So when I'm in break mode with that yellow line, it's fabulous. I can go line at a time and see what's happening. So let's talk through what's going on with this code. What's the value of R right now? So last row is 1067. What's the value of R? What do you think? So this says R equals 1. Have I executed this line yet? No. When it's yellow, it has not executed it yet. So if I ask what R is, it's going to tell me it's 0. It's the default value for all numeric variables. They always start as 0. And now when I execute this line by hitting F8 and print R again out here, now it's 1. So I can see the values change as they change. So I'm using this variable R to keep track of which row I'm looking at as I move through all of this data. I start a do loop here, nothing exciting about this. It's just going to remember that's where the loop starts. Now we're going to say, hey, if cell sub R, R is 1, so if cell row 1, column 1's value is first, what is it? Is row 1, column 1 say first? Yes, that's true. So I should step into the if statement. I'll hit F8 and it should take me in. Good. So that's there. It will then print this. It's printing that person's name. Put it down here. It prints R is 1 and the name is Ane. We then say R gets to be 1 more, so the next time I get to that line, we'll be looking at the next row. We check to see if R, which is now 2, is greater than the last row. It's not, by 1,000. We're back up to the top of the loop. Now we're checking. What do you think? This is row number 2, column number 1. Does it equal first? No, it equals last. So we'll skip by that loop, or skip by that if statement. Increment R. R is now 3. Doesn't equal first. And we just step through that. Eventually, we're going to get down to here where R is equal to 8. What's R now? So here R is 8. This doesn't equal first there, so we skip by it. R is now 9. And now we're thinking about this cell right here, and we drop back into that if statement. And now we're getting to that first line. We've identified the next block. This is an important thing for us because now we know we're ready to process that block of data. Okay, so there's some question up here that I was responding to. Are you covering that now? I don't remember who it was that asked it. We're okay? All right.
By the way, if you guys are trying to do F8, laptop probably has an FN. Probably has a whole FN.
Oh, yeah. Newer computers, they say the function key is, no one uses it anymore. We'd rather you have that for adjusting the volume or the screen. So you might have to hit the function FN key to be able to get F8. Question? That'll be the same thing for F11 as well, yeah. So yeah, if your function keys are mapped to require you to push the FN key to be able to actually get to the F11, then to open up VBA, it'd be Alt function F11 to open it up. All right. So the point is that when we're inside this loop, we are ready to start processing this block of data, whichever block we're currently on. Well, here's what we've got to do. We've got one place to put employee. We want that to be first name and last name stuck together, concatenated together. So let's go ahead and create 4 variables for this data. Oh, incidentally, once you're running like this, and you say, you know what, I'm kind of done with this, there's 2 things you could do. You could say stop this, click on the stop button, the reset button, and it just says, great, we're done with this. Or you could say play, and it will just continue playing from this point in your code. I'll go ahead and click play and let it finish off, and it went through the rest of that data. Okay, so now let's declare the variables that we need to keep track of this. I'm going to need an employee variable, dim employee, as 4 data types to choose from that we're using in this class. String, integer, single, double. Which one do I want? String. It's a collection of characters. Dim office, what data type? As string. Dim total sales. As? Could be single or double. We're going to be adding up some numbers that are in the thousands. I'm a little more comfortable with double here. Just kind of not sure exactly how much data we have here. I'm going to go ahead and drop double in. Dim total sales as double, and then dim average sales, I'll just call it ABG sales, as single would work for this. Our average quarterly sales, that's, single is going to be fine for this one. Would it be the end of the world if I used double? No, double would be fine for both of them. Question? Oh, could we use currency? Someone's doing the reading or watching the videos online. Yeah, currency would work just fine. It would work great. Only thing is, I'm saying, hey, I'm just kind of going over the kind of the basics that we need to get you through this class. And so currency would also work really well. Question? The difference between double and single is that double allows me to have up to 15 digits for the number. It doesn't matter where those digits are. Before the decimal place, after the decimal place, I got 15 digits to work with. Single, I guess, is 7 digits. Question over here, was it the same question? Okay. So now let's just go ahead, and while I'm inside this block here, oops, what have I done? I lost my immediate window. Oh, I docked it. I docked my immediate window right here. I'm in trouble. Okay. I'm going to live with it right there. Okay, so here's my if statement. So when I'm sitting here, R is going to be referring to a row that has the word first on it. So let's go ahead and establish my variable, my employee, EMPLOYEE equals, well, here's what my first name is. Actually, that's the label for first name. How do I change this so it actually gets the value of the first name? Change column 1 to column 2. Now I want to concatenate. I want to glue that onto another string, make it into one string. I use the ampersand symbol for that. And I have to have a space before it. And now let's put a space. Oh, this is always a little bit confusing. How do I make a space? How do I concatenate on a space? Well, let's suppose I wanted to concatenate on a hyphen between the first. I don't, but let's suppose I want to concatenate a hyphen. I would just make a string literal that's a hyphen. Quote, hyphen, quote. That's a string literal that's just a hyphen. So how do I make a string literal that's a space? Yeah, quote, space, quote. It's hard to see because spaces are pretty much invisible, but it's still got to be there. Then how do I get to the last name? Somebody talk me through it. I'm going to go ahead and put the code for getting to the first name. Someone tell me, how do I bring in the, right now it says the first name space first name. What change do I have to make to have this bring in the last name? Some brave soul, yeah. Yeah, I just have to change the R to R plus 1. Because if I think about it, let's look at it as if I'm on row number 9 here. I'm on here, R is 9, and so row R column 2 is first name. Well, last name is just the next row down, so I just have to make row be a little bit larger. And so this needs to be R plus 1. It's the next row down from wherever the first name is. R is referring to the row that's got the first name, so R plus 1 gets me to the next one down. Do we see that? This is kind of a big step to make right here, to realize, I could just add 1 onto R without actually changing R, just add 1 onto that number to get down to the next row. Okay, so now let's do office. Office equals, well, now it's going to be the same thing, but office is just the next one down, so that's plus 2. Oh, this next one gets a little bit ugly. Not terribly ugly. Let's do total sales. Total sales is going to be equal to what? The cell at R plus 3 plus R plus 4 plus R plus, what have I done? Control Z. So R plus 3 plus r plus 4 plus r plus 5 plus the value at r plus 6. I'm bringing in the next 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 vertical cells. I'm adding them all up together and putting their result in total sales. Now I just need the average. This is quarterly numbers, so a total sales is, or average sales will always be the total sales divided by 4. ABG sales equals total sales divided by 4. So far, so good. Any questions? I have something typed wrong?
No, just what would happen then if they then mixed up the data?
Ah!
First, and then the office was then at the bottom.
Yeah, what happens if this thing gets scrambled?
And this code is fairly useless.
The question is, this code is fairly useless, and I just take issue with the tone of the tone of the question. In fact, if I can't rely on the order of these, if I know that they're going to be in a block of 7, but I'm not sure which order they're going to be on, then what I've got to do is I would totally have to change this. You're right. We are relying on the vertical spacing of these. We are relying that Q1 is 3 cells down from first name. So, if I knew that they were 7 together and they were going to be all those 7, I just didn't know the order, then I could take another loop right in here that just says, hey, let's just loop 7 times, and then I would check the label on each one. I would say, hey, if it's Q4, do something with it. If it's Q3, if it's Office, do something with it. And the code would be much more complex because I would have to check to see what's there and then decide what to do with it. But you're absolutely right that if I couldn't depend on the vertical order here, I would need to change this code dramatically to get it to work. And you're right, it would be fairly useless if that was the case. Thanks for pointing that out. All right. Okay, so at this point, all I'm doing is I'm reading those into the variables. Let's just think about what happens. I'm going to go ahead and, I don't want you to run this with me, but I'm just going to put a breakpoint. I'll put it here where I say r equals 1. I'm going to run to that place, and let me just kind of step into this. So I'm assigning employee, office, total sales, average sales. That's fine. Now, I haven't, I'm in break mode. Oh, I must be hidden behind my immediate window. I haven't done anything with those variables yet. Okay, so I'm now here where r equals 9. I'm getting ready to process this block. What's going to happen to my value of employee? Right now, employee is holding Anna Hana. That's a great name, Anna Hana. What's going to happen to Anna Hana when I process this line right now? Where does Anna Hana go? She gets blown into oblivion. She is erased from existence. Gone. And so I've only got one location in memory, one place called employee. I've got 100 different employees to deal with here, but I've only got one location called employee in memory. I've got one variable. And so as I put this new value here, it's going to write right over the top of the old value. And so I'm using this variable just to kind of organize myself here, but before I get to the second block, what do I have to do? I've got to write the values of these variables out to the right location on the worksheet. And so let me go ahead and stop this code. And right here, after I've calculated all these values, I'm going to have to write it right up here. Now, the first time I'm going to write it to row number 2. The second time I write, it's going to be row number 3 and so forth. How am I going to keep track of which row I'm writing to? Probably need another variable to keep track of it. So let me call this one my out row. I'll just come up here and dim out row as an integer. Incidentally, you'll notice that when I have a compound variable name, I always capitalize the second letter. The nice thing about that is that when I type it, let me go ahead and set it to 1 as well, out row equals 1, you'll notice that when I type it, I type it in all lowercase, but as soon as I leave that line, the Visual Basic Editor says, oh, I recognize that variable, and it adjusts the capitalization to match how I declared it. So the nice thing about that is that as my variable names get kind of complex, I get a visual cue immediately that I've typed it correctly, and that's kind of nice. Okay, so out row is starting at 1. So now I'm getting ready to write to the out row. So let me start off by incrementing the out row. Out row equals 1 more than it used to be. So it starts at 1. The first time I get into this block, I'm going to set up these variables. Before I write them out, I'm going to increment out row. So now out row will be 2. That's where I want to write my first one, 2, line number 2. And now I'm ready to use out row to write these things out. Cells, which row do I want? Out row. Column number 4 dot value is equal to employee. And I got 4 of them. And they're in columns 4, 5, 6, and 7. And it's employee, office, total sales, and average sales. So now, whenever I find the keyword first, I'm going to read in, define those variables, figure out which out row I'm writing out to, and then write those out, and I'm ready to move on. I should be able to execute this and have it populate all that data in. Wow. So here's the question. Could I have written that by hand faster? I mean, could I have done that work by hand faster than I could actually write the program to do it? No way in this case. In many situations, it will take you longer to write the program than it would to do it once by hand. But then the next time you have to do it, you're set up and ready to go. And here's the good news. Writing the program, way more engaging than doing the work by hand. You know, you're gonna be thinking about it. It's gonna be challenging, like solving a puzzle. That's way better than copy, arrow down, paste, arrow up, copy, arrow down, paste. So, you know, if you find yourself going, you know what, I would have just rather copied it over there, that's okay. But if you're going, I would totally rather write the program than copy it, this major is for you. Hope it's not too late to change majors. Okay. I think that's this example. Any questions? Is this a lot? Yeah, this is kind of a lot to bite off. I'm trying to make you into VBA programmers in 5 days. I mean, even when you go by the book, it's teach yourself VBA programming in 21 days. I'm going to do it in 5 days. So, that's the challenge. Here's the good news, folks. When you get to the exam, the VBA stuff, open internet. Open internet, open note. So you can kind of go and search for this stuff. You're not going to have time to learn this stuff during the exam, but if you need to kind of get refreshed on the syntax for how to do the, you know, what's the syntax, how do I actually write that particular keyword, that's going to be searchable. Okay? Question? Can you refer to this that you did in class? Yeah, hold on a second. Hold on. It's open internet. Hold on a second. Yeah, close. Here's the bad news. Well, actually, it's good news. The exam is pretty similar to what I just did. So, but you can't use your notes, but it's going to be open internet. Did I say open? I didn't mean to say open. I meant to say open internet. Don't be looking at your notes. Oh, so are you going to post your notes on your web? You know how to make a web page now. You're going to post your notes on your web page? Hey, cut that out. I knew I shouldn't have taught you how to make a web page. Questions?
When you say open internet, does that mean open my educator?
Does it mean open my educator? TAs, help me here.
You can use, the way that was last time, you can use the readings for my educator, except for the multiple choice section. But you can't use like the project, you can't use this.
Yeah, so the code that we've written in class here, no. Code that's written on my educator, yes. Yeah, there's going to be a segment on there that's like, which of the what are they even called? Phases of the system development life cycle will you be gathering like requirements from your users? You know, no, you can't use your notes. You can't use my educator for that, but you know, internet would be okay for anything else. All right. What's the test going to look like? There's going to be like 4 coding exercises where you've got to do something. There's going to be like a dozen or so multiple choice questions, and then 1 flow chart that you have to make. Will it be similar to the assignment that's due today? Yeah, where you're writing a VBA program. Yep. Are you going to have to make a website on the final exam? Answer is? Let's vote on it. How many say I want to make a website on the final exam? Some of you do? Yeah. How many say no websites on the final exam? I'm with you, the no websites on the final exam part, guys. It's just VBA, system development lifecycle, flowcharts. Yep.
For the flowchart, will we have to do it by hand or will we do it with a
Question is flowchart by hand or lucid chart. You're going to have to turn it in electronically, however you do it. So if you do it by hand, you're going to have to be able to take a picture of it and then upload it. You got to upload the picture. Oh, hold on a second. Back here.
Why didn't you put the outro equals outro plus 1 below all your values?
Good question. So why didn't I put out row equals out row plus 1 when I was done using it? And the answer is I could have, but if I did, I would have to start out row up here at 2. So I did it this way just to demonstrate that it could go before. It doesn't really matter. There's nothing that says it has to go before. It's just a statement that gets me to the right row at the right time. Yep. Either way would be fine. Okay, we got one more example to do, and we got like 14 minutes to do it. Let's see what we can do. So we get a little more complexity with the clue tab. Well, here's the idea with clue. We've got Mr. Green in the billiard room with the lead pipe. Have you played this game before? So we've got, again, like 1,000 of these things. Comes down to 1,700 lines. Mrs. White in the dining room with the wrench. In terms of what we're processing here, line by line, it's pretty straightforward. We just want to take these 3 strings, concatenate them together with a in the and a with the between them. Mr. Green in the billiard room with a lead pipe. But what makes this more complex is that now we're going to do summarization across the sets. As we're running this, we want to keep a running total of how many times candlestick is used, how many times the dagger was the preferred weapon, how many times the lead pipe shows up. Over here, all of our summarization was within a block. Now we're saying we got to do some summarization across the block. So let's kind of quickly write the code together that will just do the summarization. Should be really similar to what we've done in the past. In fact, now I'll go ahead and start again. So clue, I'll just call it clue. Let us dim R as an integer. Let us dim last row. Last row as an integer. Let me go ahead and establish I can use exactly the same line of code to figure out the last row just as I did before. I'll just copy that line up. Last row. We set in my do loop, put in my do events. Let me make R equal to R plus 1. Whoops. R equals R plus 1. We're going to start R out at 1. And we're going to end we're going to loop until R is greater than last row. Actually, this isn't going to work so well for this one. I kind of went down a road that I think is not quite the right road to go down. Let me get rid of my last row approach. And let's just say R equals R plus 4. In this one, we've got one space in between. We could make the other approach work okay. It'd be a little more complex. So let's loop until cells R, 1 dot value is blank. So R is going to start at 1. Then we're going to add 4 to it. That's going to take us to 5. Next time we'll add 4 to it, takes us to 9. Add 4 to 13 to 17. Oh, really? How are they going to do it?
We've always done it with active cell down.
You're activating the cell? How will they get docked for this?
Because they'll have spaces and stuff. Dynamic spacing.
TA is telling me if I teach it to you this way, your next, is it on the exam or is it on the? On the final, this will not serve you well on the final if I teach it to you this way. Really. How are you going to do it? You're going to active down, and then how are you going to know when you're done? Let me consult with my TA. We'll pause the remote audience. All right, so now let me just go ahead and print off the value there in column 1. I just want to see Mr. Green, Mrs. White, Colonel Mustard, whoever it is. So I'm going to do a debug.print. And folks, you're going to notice that every time I write a loop where I'm looking across data, I always want to start off by printing it and making sure that I'm actually going across the data the way I think that I'm going across it. Ultimately, I don't really want this thing to be doing a debug.print, but here I just want to make sure that this looks and feels right. So I'm going to clear out my immediate window. I'm going to run this code, and I should see, oh. Am I running? Am I in break mode? I guess I finally stopped. Hold on a second. Oh, yeah, equals blank. Yeah. I just want to print the value over there. Let's try it again. There we go. I got a bunch of Mr. Greens, Mrs. Peacock, and all these things. Okay, great. So now, we're going to do the same thing. We need to keep track of my out row separately from the row that we're iterating across. So let me dim out row as an integer. And I'm ready to, before my r equals r plus 1, I'm now ready to go with out row. Let me get out row starting at row number 0. Out row equals 0. That would have been the default value for it anyway. And now let me go ahead and say what out row equals out row plus 1. Out row plus 1. So it starts at 0. I'm going to add 1 to it, so the first time will be 1. I'm going to write right over the top of Mr. Green in the billiard room with a lead pipe. And now I'm just going to say cells out row, comma 3 dot value is equal to, let's see, here's Mr. Green. Concatenated with space in the space, concatenated with one row down, r plus 1. So that's Mr. Green in the billiard room, concatenated with space with the space, whew, and then concatenated with 2 rows down. That should do it. That should do it. So if you run that now, that should fill in all of the descriptions that we're after, all of the accusations in this current game of Clue. But we still haven't gotten to the hard new part, which is keeping track of all of the individual times that the candlestick was used. So let's run this and see if it works. So Mrs. White in the lounge with a candlestick, and then White lounge candlestick. Looks great. Next one down, plum study candlestick, plum study candlestick. So far so good. I'm hoping that you looked at this and said, I totally followed that. How many of you are with me? I followed it. You might have been saying, I might have struggled to write this, but I'm totally following it. How many of you are going, this is still witchcraft to me? Okay, if you're in the witchcraft group, you got to get to the TAs quickly, or come see me. Because this shouldn't be witchcraft to you still. We got to get you to grasp this stuff. Okay. So now the question is, how are we going to keep track of how many times we've seen the candlestick? Let me see if I can just get this to where we can see what we're after. Candlestick, dagger, lead pipe, whatever. Any thoughts? Yeah. All right, let's just create a separate set of a separate counter for each one of these. I don't have time to do them all. Let's just do 2 of them. We'll try to get the first 2 going, candlestick and dagger. I'm going to create 2 variables here. I'm just going to call them candlestick and dagger. Dim candlestick. And dim candlestick as, what do you think? What type? Integer. keeping track of a number. Dim dagger as an integer. And we would do the same thing for all 6 of them. Now I'm going to come down here, and after I write the output, before I change my row, let's just do this. If, and my weapon is my last one, so let me just copy that expression. I could write this into a separate variable. I think I will. Let me come here and just dim a variable called weapon as a string. My code's just going to be a lot more readable if I do this. Let me say that weapon is equal to whatever is in the cell I'm on 2 rows down. So if I'm on Mr. Green, this is going to be lead pipe. Now let me say if weapon is equal to candlestick. Case matters, and these are capitalized. Then we're going to do something. What do we do? Then we're going to say candlestick equals 1 more than it used to be. C-A-N-D-L-E-S-T-I-C. That looks pretty good. Where is it spelled wrong? C-A-N-D. I don't know. It looks good to me. I'm just kidding. I fixed it. Thank you. Now, I got to do the same thing. Hey, look. If it's the lead pipe. No, what am I doing? Dagger. If it's a dagger, then dagger equals dagger plus 1. Let's throw one more in. Let's go ahead and do the next one down, which is lead pipe. I can't have a space in my variable name. I have one more of these lines here. And make sure I got capitalization right. Lead pipe should be an integer as well. So what I'm doing with lead pipe, candlestick, and integer is I'm keeping track of how many of each I have. The default value for these is going to be 0. Their numeric variables are going to start at 0. So each time I see candlestick, when the weapon is candlestick, I'm going to add 1 onto candlestick. The new value for candlestick is what the old value was plus 1. Thank you. So now I'm keeping these values as I go through. I'm just each time I see candlestick, add 1 to candlestick. Each time I see lead pipe, add another 1 to lead pipe. So it's going to accumulate these numbers as I go through. When I'm done with the loop, I can now write these 3 out. And so I can come right at the end of the loop and just say, I'm just going to go do it with this is cells row number 2, column 4, cells row number 2, column number 4, dot value equals candle, C-A-N-D-L-E, C-A-N-D-L-E, stick. And then I've got 2 more to do. So that's column, that's row, they're all column 4. Is it right? Oh no, it's column 5. I'll write over my labels if I'm not careful. Yikes. It is row 2, column 5. Row 2, column 5. And then row 3, column 5, and row 4, column 5. And I've got candlestick, dagger, and lead pipe. So now if I run that, it should run through, do all of the summarization, and then drop those, or do all of the concatenation, and then drop those in. The author of this example also kind of gave you the actual numbers there so you can check yourself, and we're bringing them in as the right values. One last thing that I want to show you here, folks, and they cover this in the readings online. I haven't talked about it yet, and that is, listen, if the weapon is candlestick, is there any reason for me to look to see if it's also dagger? It couldn't possibly be dagger. If it's a dagger, could it possibly also be lead pipe? And so there's a structure where I'm saying, you know what, I'm looking at the same thing every time. Just watch this. Instead of doing an end if here, I'm going to change this to else, and then I'm going to bring the word if from the next one right up on that line as one word, else if. Else if. Anytime I'm looking at the same value on each one of these if statements, I can just bring that all into one large structure that says if the weapon is this, then do this, else if the weapon is this, then do this. And it doesn't make it really, it makes it a little bit faster, but it makes it more clear that this is one block. I'm just looking at this and it's just kind of one block that I'm trying to make a decision. The point is, I can only ever get to one of these internal lines. Because once I find one that's true, I execute the code for that block and I quit looking at the rest of them. So it will be marginally faster. But it's just to kind of get you familiar with this else-if structure. It's kind of another variation on the if statement. That's it for today, folks. Questions? Do you need help or do you have a question? Not only will I post the code on Learning Suite, I'll post the video on Learning Suite too. All right, folks.